Welcome to a really good guide for Mistweaver in Mythic Plus. This build I'll be showcasing today is probably one of the highest HPS providers of all healers in the game for both group healing and tank healing. A rare perk of this build as a Mistweaver is that no component of the actual healing requires you to be in melee, and the vast majority of your damage doesn't need you to be in melee either. To add on to all of that, this build is also mana neutral, meaning you should never run out of mana if you play properly, and in most situations you will exit a pull with more mana or the same that you started with. Now this guide is just for this build. I expect you to have, at the very least, read all the basic spell tooltips of Mistweaver. Mistweaver has like 9 total rotational spells and they are very different from each other, so there's not a lot of complication there. If you don't already know what all the spells do, I want to make a beginner Mistweaver guide that'll probably be up within a few days of this video, so you can watch that link below. Then after you understand the basics of how each spell works, then you can circle back to this one. But really, it's not that complicated, so even if you don't particularly understand the spells, watch this guide maybe, and then you can like explore in-game how the spells work, and it probably all might make sense, because the class is really not that complicated. There's just a lot of interactions, and also it just sometimes isn't clear how to play a build, but I'll hopefully clear that up here. Now before we get into the deets, my entire UI, besides my healing frames and cooldown trackers, are all from Now UI. I have a video explaining how to get all that and the changes I made. I do not make the actual UI, and I have nothing to do with the team that does. But if you want anything that is not the healing frames and party cooldown tracker, it's all Now UI. You can go watch that video, it's linked in the description. The healing frames are all from an add-on called Cell, and the party cooldown tracker is from Omni CD. I will have both of these profiles linked below. They are fully set up for Mistweaver besides the click casting keybinds, because I use the stock Blizzard click casting function. And then I also use mouse over casting so that any button on my bar has a built-in mouse over cast if I'm mousing over anything. But every single thing you see on the frames, all the buff trackers, the debuff trackers, the targeted spell icons are all functions within Cell unit frames. And it'll all be included in the profile if you import it. That's again in the description, in a pastebin link probably. Alright, enough yapping. This build is very different than the Mistweaver that you might have seen, more commonly known as Fistweaving. This build relies on extremely high HPS ramps with Soothing and Enveloping Mist. This sets up a situation where your entire group is taking between 50% and 150% more healing from you through the various healing amps, which causes your Vivify to heal for about 2 to 5 million per Vivify, in addition to the 1.5 to 2 million HPS that you do when you have your hots out on the entire group in a 5-man dungeon. Now this build does have lower damage than the Fistweaving build, but I think as you progress in Mythic Plus, and if you're doing dungeons where the prog of the dungeon is you're stressed about healing it, healer damage, while it still matters, because 1 point of DPS is 1 point of DPS regardless of who it comes from, I think healer damage matters less than keeping the group alive. And especially in pugs, it's really important to overheal the pugs. Now this is something that a lot of healing guides often miss out. Not everything about healing is numbers. Sometimes healing is about keeping the vibes up or just keeping people's confidence in your healing up. In a super coordinated group where everyone understands each other, you typically only have to heal up the damage that you're taking. You don't have to top people if they're not going to take damage because you're using their health as a resource. In pugs, you don't really want to do that. You want people to feel like they're always super healthy so that they're not using their defensives in anticipation of you not healing. You want them to use their defensives in situations where they want to or where they know that they might die. You don't want them to be pressing health pot or defensives because they think you're not healing. That's something that's not going to be in logs, it's not going to be in numbers on the meters. It's people losing confidence in the healer is really, really bad for the healthy outcome of the run. That's why I think this build, while it does sacrifice some damage, you still do like 300 or 400k DPS overall or higher very easily while you're healing. It just does so much more on-demand HPS that's not cooldown reliant and that doesn't really use that much mana. And also, before I start breaking down the gameplay, a rare occurrence in this patch is that you do have a lot of things in the tree that you can change and customize for your preferences. Now, firstly, all of your damage is coming from Rushing Wind Kick and the Supercharged Chi from when you press Thunder Focus Tea. Remember, Ancient Teachings is baseline now for Mistweaver, so 30% of all your damaging abilities besides Spinning Crane Kick will heal allies, and Rushing Wind Kick and the Empowered Jade Lightning do so much damage that you can use them on cooldown, even in times of high HPS requirements, just because they will incidentally heal for a lot always. Sometimes Ancient Teaching can be one of my top healing overall, even though it's just the baseline 30% passive that every Mistweaver has now. It's important to remember that Ancient Teachings and Mistweaver's Smart Healing in general will not heal someone that's at 100% HP, even if they have a Healing Absorb. So in times of needing to heal off absorbs, you'll have to heal them manually through the build, but we'll get to that in a second. To get it out of the way, your damage priority is Empowered Crackling Jade Lightning first, although keep in mind you can store up to 2 charges of this, and they have an infinite duration. So you can save these for boss damage or for pulls with more mob count, however you want. Just note that these Empowered Lightning, the Empowered Lightning buff, does reset at the start of a key, and also when you pull a raid boss, although that's not relevant for this guide. So don't precast it before the timer, because Thunder Focus Tea will not reset when you pull the dungeon. That'll still be on cooldown, and you'll lose the benefits of it, so it's pointless. Next in the priority is Rushing Wind Kick. Remember that this is a frontal 25-yard range, so be good at aiming it, and try not to use it as your first global in a pull, unless the tank has had like a second or two to start hitting the mobs. So just be careful. You can pull aggro with this, especially if you Thunder Focus Tea and then Rushing Wind Kick, so you do it twice and it crits both. But this will have you starting the pull, even if you wait for a second, at like 1 point something million HPS, and if you don't really have to heal much that pull, you will probably maintain about 1 million HPS throughout if it's a pull that's enough targets and it's with Lust, for example. Now, after you Wind Kick, if it's single target, go into a standard Blackout Kick, then Tiger Palm in the downtime to try to fish for more Rushing Wind Kick resets. Your goal with Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, and Rushing Wind Kick, the goal is just Rushing Wind Kick. It's just that Blackout Kick is resetting Rushing Wind Kick, and Tiger Palm in the downtime is giving you duplicated Blackout Kicks. But again, the goal is just Rushing Wind Kick. If it had no cooldown, it'd be all you would be pressing. Spinning Crane Kick is a nice AoE filler, or even sometimes a boss filler, just because it's not a true melee ability. So if Rushing Wind Kick is on cooldown and you're too far away to Blackout Kick if you wanted to, you could Spinning Crane Kick at the edge of a pack or at the edge of a boss, and it just gives some damage input, which is better than nothing. Remember, Spinning Crane Kick will also proc your Chi-Ji related proc in your hero talent, so it will do some healing, and every single time Chi-Ji spawns from that, you also get a charge of Mana Tea, so it's not entirely wasteful to Spinning Crane Kick, and sometimes you will find yourself doing it a lot if melee is super dangerous, because you can Spinning Crane Kick and sort of like orbit the mobs, and the damage will still occur. Now, Touch of Death I won't talk about much. It's a pretty obvious ability use. Just use it if you can. Now, just before we move on to healing, let's talk about your utility and defensive super fast. Most of the Monk utility is very obvious in the usage. Leg Sweep is an AoE stun, Ring of Peace knocks back, you have a true melee interrupt, which is really nice, and you can use your paralysis because it doubles as a de-enraging soothe. With regards to defensives, Fort Brew is your personal wall and health increase. It's extremely strong, and Diffuse Magic is a ultra strong 60% magic damage reduction, which is amazing considering most one-shots in the game are magic. Now, Diffuse Magic also dispels and sort of like reflects the debuff back to the target if it's possible. Be very careful with using this. A lot of the times, especially in like Mist of Tyr and a Scythe, if you have an AoE debuff on yourself and you send it back to the boss or the mobs, it will hit your melee players whenever it expires on the mob. These two defensives, though, combined with Expel Harm that you will use as your highest priority self-heal, mean that you are probably the hardest healer to kill, despite not caring about the versatility stat at all. Like if you see here in this clip, I'm running through 2 of these beams. Now this is just on a 10, but I can run through 2 of these beams with Diffuse Magic and Fort Brew to res my tank while just soaking the damage of the beams and not really healing myself. It's that strong if you combine them, but they're also very, very strong independently. Now, I do take Chi Burst in this build. This is pretty much the ability you press when you want to deal damage, but you're forced into range for whatever reason. You could just send it through the pack, and you've already used Rushing Wind Kick because that would still be priority. Now, Chi Burst is totally free from any costs, and it actually does a decent bit of damage overall if you aim it well and use it frequently. If you couldn't care less about this much damage, you can just use Chi Wave instead of Burst to just have one less thing to press, and it will just give you a passive couple percent. Now, this choice node will not affect your outcomes pretty much at all, so just do whatever you want. This build also uses Lighter Than Air, the bottom left capstone, which is the double jump dash you get after you roll. This is totally personal preference again, but this ability is super strong because you can use it as an emergency dodge, but you can also use it to counter knockbacks, and there's quite a lot of knockbacks. And because you have multiple charges of roll, you can roll mid-air, double jump, then spam roll again, and then double jump again when you cancel the animation, and it will preserve your momentum from the roll so you just like fly across the map. Okay, now on to healing. This build's primary healing rotation comes from Soothing Mist channels, so remember to put your Jade Serpent statue down at the start of each pull, because it does a decent amount of totally free healing and is a really good indicator to your pugs that they're being healed. Remember, again, not everything about healing is raw numbers, and I think it's really important that your pugs are seeing your healing happening visually, just to keep the vibes up, keep the confidence up. It sounds stupid, you might think this is dumb. I genuinely have found that it actually makes a difference in like the overall outcome of the keys. Now, this sort of like enriching of the vibes, which again sounds stupid, is the entire philosophy of this build, because the idea is that you can overheal any HPS related mechanic, or even like a lot of casts going off, or a lot of people standing and stuff. Any at all, you can overheal in the dungeon pool up to like level 13. I can confidently say at level 13, you can heal the stupidest things and the biggest mistakes without any issue. Now, there are some things I want to highlight quickly in the spec tree before we move on to talking about gameplay. Firstly, you have a choice of whether you want to play the 1 minute Yulon or the longer to 2.5 minute Yulon. I run the 1 minute Yulon for the sake of mana economy. Since this build is not reliant on actual cooldowns to heal, I prefer to have less potent cooldowns while keeping myself very high on mana. Just in case shit hits the fan, I want the mana economy just to be able to have all that mana soak up all the mistakes and keep everyone alive. Now, you can play the longer cooldown Yulon, and I actually find that it works very, very well if you're scared about longer bosses. So for example, in Necrotic Wake, the second and third bosses have periods of high ticking damage on the group for the entire phase, while also having moments for your group to take accidental damage, like puddles or casts. The extended Yulon supports you for basically a full phase on the second boss, or the full life of an abomination on Stitchflesh. This is really, really nice for keeping people at 100% HP, so that if any mistaken damage happens, it does not kill them. Just note that with the extended Yulon, because you have the 50% reduction in enveloping mist cost that Yulon gives, you have it less frequently. It means that you will sometimes have to sit down and drink at the end of a pull, because remember, you don't want to use a mana tea at the end of a pull, you want to use mana tea prior to having to heal, because mana tea's real strength is the 30% reduction in mana cost it gives you for each stack that you consume. If you use all your enveloping mists in that 30% mana cost reduction window, which you can do actually over an entire key, you can make sure that every single enveloping mist is in that window. You will never drop beneath like 70% mana the entire key. Now, the next thing to note is that we take Peer into Peace on this choice node so that you can start channeling Soothing Mist, then cast your other spells and it will retarget itself. Absolutely do not need more Renewing Mist charges and Renewing Mist cooldown reduction in dungeons. You will have 5 Renewing Mists on everyone pretty much the entire time without really thinking about it. Now, also know that we take Peaceful Mending. Now, Peaceful Mending really sucks. The only reason we take this is to get to the capstone beneath it. You don't play around Peaceful Mending at all. If you're ever holding Soothing Mist on the tank, for example, that's for the 6% damage reduction from the class tree that Soothing Mist provides. It is not for Peaceful Mending. If there was any other 1-point node I could take around this area to get to the Rising Mist choice node, I would take that instead. Now, also, this Rising Mist choice node is actually a choice that you can make. The build works very well with Tear of Mourning. However, Tear of Mourning I find to be too GCD intensive. I really like having Rising Mist for moments where a DPS player takes damage just after I've healed a lot of periodic damage, and Rising Mist will naturally extend all your hots as long as you use Rushing Wind Kick pretty much on cooldown. And I find that the extension of these hots increases my flexibility in having potent heals out on the group, just for when the damage lasts longer than you think, or for when things go off that shouldn't have gone off. Tear of Mourning I think will work better in coordinated groups or as you get more confident playing the class, as it infuses your healing windows with considerably more HPS, but it makes it so that when a healing window ends, you have to basically rebuild the window. You don't have any sort of grace period in extending it. I also find that even up to the 13 and my attempts at 14 key levels, Tear of Mourning was overhealing way too much on this build, and the build already overheals kind of a lot. So I prefer the Rising Mist's incentive and feedback loop with Rushing Wind Kick than Tear of Mourning for now. That being said, if I go to like a new key on a new key level with a super high HPS requirement, like maybe a really high Necrotic Wake or a really high Stone Vault, I will probably run Tear of Mourning my very first time doing a higher key, just for the safety of whose ever key it is, and just for the safety of having a little extra tank healing as well. Alright, now on to the gameplay, and what I like about this build is that it's very simple to play. A lot of the work of this build comes from making the build and not a lot from execution, so you can focus on keeping people topped up a lot more, and you have a lot more mental bandwidth for interrupting and doing basic utility, and monitoring your teammates' cooldowns to know when they need a life cocoon or when they need extra healing. The build's core that I call the healing window is entering a Soothing Mist channel when you know damage is coming out, then pre-applying enveloping mist on the entire party or on everyone that you care about. Then you rushing wind kick at the end of that when everyone has enveloping mist on them to extend them all. Then you can re-enter a soothing mist channel and get ready to dish out instant vivifies to whoever has the lowest HP. Remember to leave the soothing mist channel to rushing wind kick, as extending the renewing mist and extending the enveloping mist and even applying a new renewing mist from the rushing wind kick is very, very valuable. And then that's basically how you heal. It's an enveloping mist ramp that's into a Vivify whack-a-mole to the health bars. Now you can bolster this by using Thunder Focus Tea on renewing mist prior to give you haste, so that the ramp is not only doable in just a couple seconds, but also healing for way more as all your hots are hasted. And you can even either double that up or instead add Yulon in to infuse you with an additional 20% haste, which at that point it makes it not even a ramp because you can Yulon reactively since it gives a shield to the group just for 1 tick of damage, and then enter the initial soothing mist and start dishing out enveloping mist in just over a second after you whip out that Yulon and get all the haste. Now I will only ever enter soothing mist if I know that there is a potential to cast enveloping mist. You don't hard cast enveloping mist unless you have a strength of the Black Ox proc from the hero talents. However, it's totally fine to hard cast Vivify, since remember, Soothing Mist isn't actually buffing your healing, it's just making it able to be accessed quicker. But Vivify is already such a fast cast that you don't get more Vivifies if you Soothing Mist and spam Vivify versus if you just spam Vivify. The reason for even re-entering Soothing Mist after you've already put it on the party is the potential to re-up the window and extend it if the damage continues for longer than you thought. And also remember, Rushing Wind Kick and Enveloping Mist are reapplying Renewing Mist on targets even if they already have it. This means that Chi Harmony, that first 8 seconds of Renewing Mist that gives people 50% more healing taken, is being reapplied every single time you Enveloping Mist. So if you Enveloping Mist all 5 members of the group, then Rushing Wind Kick, between Enveloping Mist, Mending Proliferation, and Chi Harmony, they have roughly 150% healing amp, if you also take into account the fact that Yulon gives everyone an additional 10%. And remember, whenever you have an Instant Vivify from the natural Instant Vivify, it's also healing for 20% more. And then you have the intermittent Zent pulses that are buffing Vivify by even more. So you're just bombing out this almost lay on hands value Vivifies if they crit. Now, as you've probably seen from the footage in the background, that this is doing a ridiculous amount of group healing that you can maintain forever as long as you have mana. This is why it's really, really important to make good use of Mana Tea prior to needing to heal, as you can see here. Even on extremely high HPS Stitch Flush, where we've let multiple Abominations spawn, I still have a healthy bit of mana at the end. You can also keep Renewing Mist applied and Enveloping Mist on the tank, and then stay in a Soothing Mist and spam Vivify for about 1.5 to 3 million HPS on the tank, depending on if Mending Proliferation procs on him or not. Remember, Soothing Mist gives the tank 6% DR, so if they're taking tank busters where they have no defensives up, this 6% DR can make the difference, especially as you go up in key levels. But of course, it's a really big opportunity cost to sit in Soothing Mist, so just make sure you need it if you're actually doing it. And when you're healing just the tank, you will have to reapply Enveloping Mist kind of a lot just to make sure it's pandemic refreshing and it's always active and that they always have Chi Harmony buff on them. For example, in this pull here, you can see the tank in this dungeon has been taking a lot of damage. So I Chi Cocoon him at the start of the pull when after he drops into his safety Guardian of Ancient Kings. And then I can look at how much health he's losing based on how much health is being taken out of my life cocoon to know how hard the hits are hitting him and how frequently these hits are happening. This lets me know how much I need to heal him, and it also lets me know how much health, which for me here was about half HP, I would need before I had to Vivify him and try to heal him back up. Besides that, I just kept all my hots on him, including the statue and Soothing Mist, and this amount of tank healing is made way more important by the fact that Prot Paladin is dominant in the meta right now. And about 98.3% of Prot Paladins are terribly bad while playing a tank with almost zero passive mitigation. But yeah, most of the power in this build, again, is the build, and it isn't in the execution. There's not many mistakes you can make other than just like being lazy and not having anything prepped for an actual healing window. It also is very fun. It's very in theme with Monk to sit there in Renewing Mist, or rather in Soothing Mist, just bombing out millions of HPS. Like on this Stitch Flush boss, I did like 1.7 million HPS while doing some overhealing. That's, I think, as much as I did on Mythic Kaiveza on our kill, which is ridiculous, by the way, that this is only 4 other people that I'm healing. And it's also much more relaxing, in my opinion, than playing the Fistweaving build, because there's 2 major problems with the Fistweaving, well, 3 major problems, in my opinion. Firstly, it's being in melee, especially in melee dominant groups. That's extremely restrictive and can like stifle you out of not being in melee in dangerous moments. Like for example, the last boss of Siege of Borealis has a lot of line of sighting over these hills, and melee can be really crowded if multiple people get the debuff. That's really annoying if the only way for you to heal is by being in melee. The other thing is that Fistweaving is super high APM for not a lot of reward, because Fistweaving is very reliant on Fistweaving in its cooldowns, but you're always having to press buttons to keep the passive healing up a lot. Fistweaving has an even worse issue, which is that you can only smart heal from Fistweaving within 40 yards, and obviously some classes in the game now have more than a 40-yard range, and some mechanics even require you to stand and range them after 40 yards. This is super annoying when you have to be in melee Fistweaving, and you have to heal like a hunter that's standing 43 yards away. There is just actually no way for you to do that sometimes, and sometimes you just suffer as a result of the build. Not to mention that there is a slight delay in when you hit the boss and when the Fistweaving healing is dealt out, and people can die in that, or you can see someone not getting healed when you Rising Sun Kick. You Vivify them as a Fistweaver, and then they get healed from Rising Sun Kick, and the Vivify overheals, and it's just... I just think that this Soothing Mist build is way more flexible, way more enjoyable, and way more conducive to a pugging environment where things are more random, more chaotic, and just generally less disciplined. And the HPS output of this build is so high that you can heal off all of the dominant healing mechanics in this Season 1 dungeon pool. This even goes for the affix if you're playing keys under level 12, but this also means you can go into Grim Batal without a Curse Dispel and simply just heal off the healing absorbs. It's amazing. Now, with regards to your cooldown usage, Yulon is pretty self-explanatory. It quite literally just buffs your Enveloping Mist, and the whole build revolves around Enveloping Mist. So you simply press Yulon prior to entering the healing window, then you store Revival for mistakes or times where the damage persists past your healing window. But you don't want to spend time refreshing HOTS, because sometimes there's like 2 ticks of damage past your healing window, and you just CBA to really just sit there and Soothing Mist again. You can just Revival to get everyone up. Then for your hero talents, Celestial Conduit is mostly passive and it's entirely reactive in its active ability. You simply press it when you need healing and you don't have time to enter a healing window. Or sometimes if you just simply don't want to enter a healing window and you have Celestial Conduit up, it's a nice alternative. Now keep in mind it's very short and it's also smart healing, so it will not heal people that are at max HP even if they have a healing absorb. And also keep in mind Conduit's 20-yard range, and it spreads its healing equally on allies, which is good or bad. If it's healing more allies, it'll heal them each for less, but you can even Conduit on like a tank in a really, really urgent moment if you have nothing else prepped for him, and it will tunnel all of that Conduit healing into just the one target that needs it. And also note that a lot of people don't know you can use a lot of abilities in Conduit. Typically, it's like any utility ability you can use. So for example, you can roll around during Conduit, and you can double jump, lighter than air, dash in Conduit. You can also interrupt mobs in Conduit. There might be other things that you can use, so just try them out. A lot of times monks are like sitting in Conduit, letting a cast go off. You don't ever need to do that. You can just kick and it won't interrupt your Conduit. It'll keep healing. That's basically it though. I've been cooking this build up for a while after taking anecdotes from what Chinese region Mistweavers are running, which is always super different to NA and super interesting, and it's usually somewhat closer to EU builds for some reason. Shout out to the Chinese Mistweavers that showed me this build. It's super interesting, it's really fun, but very rarely do we have a build that's actually good, but it feels super thematic and very rewarding, and it's very visually stimulating to play this. And it's also flexible in, so far, any dungeon, any pug, any comp. I've never had an issue with this one. I have had conditional issues with Fistweaving, especially when Fistweaving with either an all-melee comp or a non-melee comp. They're both equally bad in different ways. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, this was an outline of this one build. I have not seen this build mentioned in any major guide. It's not even on logs. All of the mythic raid logs or high key logs that are using this build are literally my character's logs on archon.gg. So I'm just like a one-man army playing this build right now. I just wanted to spread it because it's super fun. And I think a lot of Mistweavers are put off by the fact that a lot of people rather that want to play Mistweaver are put off by the fact that you have to play as like a DPS Fistweaving, when that is, in my opinion, not the better build. It is the higher damage build by a mile, because you can do like 1 million overall playing a super damaging Mistweaver that just doesn't have to heal. But it is not the best build in pugs, and it is definitely not the easiest, and it's also not the most like applicable among a different type of situations, especially when you consider Fistweavers can't heal off healing absorbs. So yeah, just that alone is already really annoying if like the boomkin in your group just isn't cursed dispelling. But yeah, anyways, that's it for now. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know your experience with this build. I'll be super active in the comments to try to help out. And if you want me to upload different VODs I have of certain dungeons playing this build, or you want me to try certain dungeons playing this build, I will happily do that. I just want to know that it's like there's a demand for it, because otherwise it's just a lot of work. And if no one's going to watch it, what's the point? Anyways, that's all for now though. Later.